Welcome to Santa Barbara Talks with Josh Molina. It's my pleasure today to be here with a living legend, Mark Patton, longtime sports writer for the Santa Barbara News Press. And these are the conversations I really love to have the most because you get to talk to other journalists about the craft of journalism, reporting, telling stories. And I couldn't really be doing it with anyone better than, somebody who's who's just sort of a legend in town, and journalism runs in their blood. So, Mark, how are you doing today?
Oh, good, Josh. I'm doing great, living the good life, and I'm in Idaho right now, and at Sun Valley, and visiting grandchildren and my daughter. So things couldn't be better.
Great. Well, Mark, you recently retired from the Santa Barbara News Press after a long career there in sports writing. So let's just dive right in and talk a little bit about your career and what it was like for you to cover sports. You definitely are one of these people who, when you write, people look for your byline, people know who you are, they've come to develop a relationship with your work, and you're somebody who, when you stop working, people notice. So let's talk a little bit about what it was like for you to be a sports writer all these years.
Well, it's as you know, Josh, my father had been the sports editor. He moved to Santa Barbara when I was just a couple of weeks old. He had been working for the Merced Sun-Star, and thank goodness he moved from Merced to Santa Barbara, because it allowed me to grow up in the greatest, most beautiful city in the world. And obviously, because my father was a sports editor, I really got interested in the business at a young age. I mean, I remember going into the news press building when I was a toddler, and back in the old days, when they had the teletype machines, and it was just a noisy place and kind of a fun place, and days before computers or any pagination or any of that kind of thing. And his great grandfather had been it's kind of been in our family. His great grandfather had been a pretty well known editor in Indiana, and then he got recruited to be the top government reporter for the Salt Lake Tribune. Was the first person ever laid in state at the Capitol building in Salt Lake City. He was so revered as a journalist for the Salt Lake Tribune, and my dad was actually named after him. So it's really kind of been in my lifeblood, the newspapers and reporting, journalism. And I followed my dad around, when he was covering Gaucho games. I remember my first basketball game I ever went to was I actually wrote about this in my first Noozhawk column, about going to Robertson Gym when it first opened. They were playing Cal, which was the defending national champion, and the Rob Gym was packed, obviously. And I remember actually crying there because it was so loud, and so it was actually hot too. The ventilation wasn't great, and there were a million people packed in there. And but I knew pretty early that this was a kind of a fun life, being a reporter, fun and important. And my dad actually tried to discourage me from it a little bit. He said, you're not going to get rich doing this, maybe you should become a doctor or a lawyer or something like that. And no, from pretty early on, I wanted to be a journalist.
What did you love about it early on? Because, we've heard all of that. You'll make more money doing something else, almost anything else, a professional career choice. What was it that attracted you to journalism and writing that sort of lit that fire in you?
I guess I could be called a people person. I love meeting people. I was actually kind of shy as a little kid, and would kind of retreat to my room. I'm from a really big family of 7 kids.
Mm-hmm.
And, I was kind of shy at first, but then, as I would follow my dad around and see him interviewing these people, and some of them would be famous, some of them would just be local people. And I kind of thought, this is great. You get to know people, and people, being a sports writer, people usually like talking to you. It's not like, you're a political reporter talking to
City Hall politics reporter. Yeah.
right. I actually did that for a little while when I was out of college. When I worked for the Santa Maria Times, and I was a police and reporter. I covered the courts and covered some government too. And I realized right then that people don't like talking to you as much then when you're covering the police beat or whatever. And sports is a little different. And I think it's just, meeting people and getting to know people. And I really do enjoy that.
Yeah. Now, some sports writers I know, had athletic careers, or they wanted to be professional athletes or go as far as they could. Did you ever sort of see yourself on the basketball court when you were covering these people, sort of in your head? Were you imagining you were one of them, or were you approaching it as, I'm a journalist here and I'm covering this?
Absolutely. My dream was to be the shortstop for Los Angeles Dodgers, or maybe a shooting guard for Los Angeles Lakers. I went to Bishop Diego High School, and I played 4 different sports there at different times. None of them well enough to ever, I think I realized in high school, I don't think I've got it to be a professional athlete. I did go, kind of interesting. I was going to go to USC right out of high school. My father passed away at a pretty early age when I was my senior at high school. He was only 45, passed away of cancer. And I was going to go to USC at that time. I'd been admitted, and I remember going to, my dad was being honored at the athletic roundtable banquet that year. And I went there with my mother and my older brother. And I was still planning to go to USC at the time. I remember Bob Dynaberg came up to me, and the athletic director, he'd been a friend of my dad's, and I think he'd heard I was going to go to USC. And he says, he kind of asked me, what are your plans? And I said, well, I'm planning to go to USC. And he goes, wow, that's great. Congratulations. Can your mother afford this? And you're getting a full scholarship. And I had said, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm a stupid kid, right? I don't know how this all is all going to go down. And USC isn't very, very cheap. And he kind of told me about this journalism program they had at City College. They were winning awards every year, and the advisor was getting their top guy a scholarship to USC almost every year. And so, and then he asked me, do you want to play sports? And at that time, I realized that I wasn't good enough to play sports at USC, but I kind of entertained the idea of playing baseball at City College. And I did. I went out and was on the team, and did end up going to City College. And that was kind of my last foray into it. And then I actually got married during my sophomore year, started having a family. And I realized at that point, I had to put those toys away. And so that was my last time playing on a school team. And but what I did, Josh, was I've been playing slow pitch softball kind of ever since. I've been kind of a slow pitch softball nut, one of these guys. And I still although COVID kind of took me out of the lineup for last year and this year, but I played senior softball with all my old buddies and so forth. So yeah, I still envision myself as being playing at Dodger Stadium. I think I could fantasize that when I'm at Ealing's Park still.
Yeah, I think that's the fantasy of a lot of high school players. Just that dream never dies. You always sort of see yourself out there. So I wanted to sort of talk to you a little about your career route. You said you worked at the Santa Maria Times. So talk to me about how you got to the news press, and what were things like when you first started?
Well, when I graduated from USC, I actually had an internship. I was a political science minor at USC as long as a journalism major, and I had an internship on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. And I when I was getting done, I had an opportunity to stay in Washington and work, get a job there in Congress. And I realized then that this wasn't what I wanted to do with my life. I didn't want to get into politics or any of that kind of thing. So, my dream had always been to be a reporter. When I was at USC, I actually was, I tried to get on there because I transferred after City College and went to USC. And I lucked out because it was really hard to get a spot on the Daily Trojan. They have a journalism school at USC that's a major, and you've got hundreds of guys wanting to be on the Daily Trojan. And fortunately for me, when I transferred there for my junior year, the assistant editorial director had decided not to return to school. So they had a tryout for their editorial writer for the Daily Trojan. And that's what I've been writing editorials for the Channels, the City College newspaper, during my sophomore year. And we had an amazing advisor, Ray Canton. He'd been a pro. He'd worked for the Minneapolis Tribune, Chicago Tribune, Sacramento Bee. And he was, he had retired from being a reporter, but now he was an advisor and taught me how to write, really taught me how to write, basically. And one of those things was he taught me how to write editorials, because it's a little different than writing a news story. And so when I had a tryout with about 12 other people for this job on the Daily Trojan, and I don't think any of them really knew the nuances of writing editorials. And so they gave us a test. We had to write about some issue, and I ended up winning that contest and got on the Daily Trojan and graduated from there. The next semester, I became the editorial director and then became their features editor of Daily Trojan. I kept trying to get on the sports staff. And the guy said, I got a line of guys who've been wanting to, cover the football team or cover the basketball team and so forth. And so I never covered sports at USC. And so when I got when I got the job at the Santa Maria Times, they were looking for a cops reporter, someone to cover the police beat. And so I did that for a while, but it's interesting. I wrote a story. I got kind of affected by a story. There was because I covered the police beat, there was an incident where a little girl had been killed by her mother's boyfriend. And I kind of did, I really kind of wanted to look into the story. I already had one of my daughters at that time was 2, same age. And I kind of delved in the story. I kind of read the probation reports and went through all this stuff and found out that the Child Protection Services had warned this child. In fact, I remember reading this one counselor's report saying if this girl isn't taken out of this home, this girl will not live to see her 5th birthday. And it really affected me. And I actually did a big story on it in the Santa Maria Times. And, and it kind of part of it was, just to get it out of me, because it was kind of an emotional story for me to write. And then at that point I realized, I don't think I want to do this. And I admire you guys who cover the police beat and cover the kind of maybe the underbelly of society and so forth. And I kind of miss sports. So, they actually had an opening at the Santa Maria Times for a sports editor, and I applied for it and got it. And so I was sports editor there for really a brief time. And then the news press, the sports editor at the time was Dave Cole, who had worked for my dad. And he knew I was out of college and so forth. So he gave me a call one day and said, hey, I got an opening, for a sports writer. And are you interested? And it was a chance to return to Santa Barbara, where I grew up, and work with a couple other guys in the staff who were my dad's, colleagues and who I knew really well. So I jumped at the chance, and Dave did a really nice thing for me, because my first year on the staff, I was hired in December of 1977. And like the next week, the Rams were playing a big playoff game. And Dave said, hey, do you want to cover that game for us? And I go, oh my gosh, yeah, cover an NFL playoff game. It was, I remember going to the game, and because we were not the LA Times, we didn't get to sit in the press box because, it's a big game and there's a million reporters from all over, and it was against the Minnesota Vikings. And I had to sit out in the auxiliary press box outside, and it was the Mud Bowl game. It was raining cold. And I sat out there in the cold, hard rain. My notes were all running off my notepads and everything. But I still loved it. And then Dave let me cover the World Series that year. The Dodgers played the Yankees. And so right away, I got to have some plum assignments. And I don't know, maybe he was taking care of his buddy's kid, but it was kind of a nice way to get introduced to the Santa Barbara News Press.
Yeah, you got to cover the good stuff right away. That's kind of cool. That's the great thing about Santa Barbara is we're close to that LA market. So, we're able to cover those types of sports events and those types of big events. If the paper will allow us, it's something, it's doable to go there. What's the hardest thing about writing sports for you? I think that there's a perception that, you like sports, you write about sports, you chum it up with the coaches, the players, and you just kind of throw it onto the page and everybody loves it. It's difficult to write sports. Can you talk about some of the, what's difficult, the challenges of it, and how you've grown over the years?
Yeah, it's funny. Ask this question of Barry Rapunzel, the Noozhawk sports editor, because he had been, we had been. I was sports editor for the News Press for 9 years, from I think 1994 to 2003. Barry was my deputy sports editor, kind of ran the desk, and then we kind of flipped roles later on. I became a columnist, and Barry became the sports editor. And Barry would tell you the toughest thing for me to do is to meet deadline. And because Barry was always waiting. Mark, where's your story? Come on, it's 11 o'clock. We got to get this thing in here. And in a good way, Barry's an awesome guy, but that's what Barry would tell you. And I'd always want to get every little fact in and so forth. And that was probably one of the hardest things too. I had to learn, when to cut things off. And John Zant was the sports editor before me. I took over for John, and they wanted John to be a columnist too. So that's why I kind of took over as sports editor. And John was a tremendous mentor to me. Obviously growing up with a father who was a journalist, I learned a lot from him. But, I think John taught me a lot about writing. And I remember he gave me we used, do these personnel evaluations, and John's such a good guy. He had a hard time, criticizing anybody. But John told me one time at one of our evaluations, he says, Mark, you're a really good writer, all this stuff, but you try to seem to get every little thing in your notebook into the story, and you'll interview somebody and everything you got in there, and your stories are so long, remember this, sometimes less is more. And if you have some really important bullet points in your story, you should, emphasize those and not try to get everything into the story. And I think that was kind of a challenge for me, because I'd want to get everything in the story. You think everything's important. That was a difficult thing too. But probably maybe the biggest thing for me was, like I said, I'm a people person. I like people. I'm not. I don't like writing negative stories. Mm-hmm. Just kind of my personality. I like the positive, kumbaya. I'm that kind of guy. And I got an interview one time, back when things were getting a little more rough at the News Press. I had an interview to be the columnist for the Eugene Register Guard. Paul Yarborough used to work for the News Press. I'd heard that they had an opening. He got me up there for this interview, and I went in there, and the guy I was one of three guys to interview for the job. And the guy looked at my stuff. He goes, I really like your writing, but I'm looking at all these columns of yours, and there's nothing that's real edgy. We like some controversy. We like, edginess in our columnists. And I thought about it saying, I go, then I'm not your guy. I'm not the kind of guy who likes to dig up dirt. I like telling stories. I guess I'm a storyteller, which is kind of what my column's about. And, and I have written stories that you haven't, to talk about maybe some tough stuff and maybe we're edgy, but they were not the columns I was showing this guy. And I didn't want that to be kind of my, the thing I would emphasize is the edginess of the sports world. So I think that's probably the one thing I struggled with as a columnist.
Yeah, it's definitely a tough thing. I always sort of enjoy talking about the challenges people have had, writing about what they've had to overcome, because I feel like when you have your kicker of the triumph of their life, whether it's, I have written some sports, but it's mostly just feature stories in this context. That payoff is much better when you know what they've overcome. And so I've always sort of liked doing that and sort of, digging a little bit about the adversarial circumstances that they have had to face. I always wanted to be a sports writer growing up. I really liked boxing. My dad was the kind of guy who'd get the guys over in the garage, and we watched Larry Holmes fights, and sort of like I'd be in the background kind of like, why are they so excited about this, and then you kind of sort of get into it, watching that. And I had the opportunity to cover some MMA when I worked up in San Jose. And, I tell you, it's sort of, I guess it's like the reverse for us. I have no problem interviewing politicians or elected officials or activists. They don't really faze me, but you interview these professional athletes like right before they are about to compete and or fight, or they're cutting weight. Oh man, you got to be crisp with your questions, in and out, and you got to do your research because they don't have a lot of patience for you. But I always wanted to be a sports writer. I just thought it would be really cool, but I gravitated toward government and politics and news just because that's really cool too. So I sort of admire all the genres. It's really difficult to be a journalist and tell those stories. And I like what John Zant told you, because less is more, brevity is key. What you tell them will mean more if you focus on just a few points, because you can't tell everybody everything all the time because it's too much. So you're sort of in this elite class, Mark. Every community would love to have somebody like you who's sort of been around for 30 years, almost 40 years, and sort of been kind of the face of a department or a face of a newspaper. And you really were that for the news press. And some communities have a person like that, like when they retire, it's a big deal. And so you're kind of elite class because you are that guy. And so can you talk about how it is you gravitated toward your column writing? So you were sports editor, and then you mentioned that you became a columnist. And what is that like? Like, what is the day like? How do you find a column, and how do you write about that? I mean, obviously there's some tips, but I mean, that's hard. Like, because so many people, I'm sure, would love to be the subject of a column. You've got to figure out who it is. Can you walk us through that process a bit?
Yeah, I think I would never recommend like a newbie to be a columnist, because it's you have to tap into a lot of history of your of maybe a team, a player. You really got to know the lay of the land, and it's tough because I didn't start writing columns in the news press, so I think I'd been there for maybe 10 years or so. And when I was sports editor, I wrote the column weekly. It was hard to find time to do it more than that. And then when I switched over as a columnist, I used to write like 4 a week, and they wanted the New York, Jerry Roberts was the editor at the time, and he really wanted more of a column presence in the news press. So he really wanted me to write my column more often. And so I think it's funny, it's kind of a magical process, Josh. I mean, it's you get inspired, and I don't know, not sure even where it comes from. Usually it's a lot of it's paying attention, like and asking the right questions. I'll get to know the athletes. Thank goodness, the news press was really good. I would travel with like the UCSB basketball team to all their games, wherever they went. I've been all over the country with them over a long period of time. And I also traveled with the baseball team for a while. And like, I'll give you an example. I was traveling with the basketball team, and UCSB had this new pretty good player they had recruited by the name of Carrick DeHart. It was his freshman year. And it was back when Brian Shaw was, was playing with the Gauchos. First time they went to the NCAA tournament in 1988. Actually, I think Carrick was a sophomore that year. And I remember thought, I'm going to interview this kid. And so we kind of sat down. I went to his hotel and went in his hotel room, and we just sat and started chatting. I just feeling him out. I wanted to show him I'm a regular guy. He's a little bit intimidated. He's a young kid. He's from, inner city LA. Santa Barbara was kind of a new experience for him. And so I just started talking. He could see that I'm just a regular guy, and we kind of joked a little bit. I think I used that a little bit. I try to make it, light. And then he kind of, out of nowhere, he just kind of opened up about his life. He talked about, he was kind of a skinny little kid, and, you know, he's from a, you know, broken family. And he said he kind of got hooked into a gang, and they used to use him because he was so skinny. He told me that they used to he was a guy who would sneak into the stores, you know, when they would break into a store, because he could fit through the bars. And he's telling me a story, and he's getting pretty emotional about it. And he told me about how his life was turned around by a guy by the name of Benny Davenport. He ended up playing basketball with him in high school, and Benny's son, Carlton, ended up coming to UCSB too, which I think was a big reason Carrick turned down Kansas to come to play for UCSB, because Carlton Davenport was playing there. So he's telling me the story, and it became a column, you know, and it became I think a pretty poignant column. And a lot of it, I think, was because I got to know this guy. You know, I mean, he wasn't just some guy playing basketball, and I'm interviewing him in the locker room, and that's kind of it. You know, and so thank goodness the news press in those days was, you know, sending me out and spending time with these people. And another time, sometimes you look into these things, Josh. You know, as I mentioned, Dave Cole sent me to cover the World Series, and it was kind of a famous little incident where Reggie Jackson was playing for the Yankees, and it came down to the last inning, and you know, the Yankees had some runners on base, Dodger Stadium, and the Dodgers bring in this rookie out of the bullpen, Bobby Welch, to pitch against them. And it's kind of a famous moment in World Series history. He came in there and he kept throwing fastballs at Reggie, and Reggie kept fouling him back. And eventually he threw him a high fastball, and Reggie struck out. Dodgers win, celebrate. So I noticed, and I'm thinking, I want to write a column about this. But I noticed when he was walking out of the bullpen, that their bullpen catcher, Jerry Grody, he was their third string catcher, he was a good catcher in his day. He was at the end of his career, and he stopped Bobby Welch, who was coming out of the bullpen, and he leaned it, because it was so loud, he leaned in his ear and told him something for like a good 10 seconds. And then Bobby Welch came in, and I kind of made a mental note. I don't think anyone else is going to notice this. That might be my column. What did this old catcher tell Bobby Welch when he came in? So I went in the locker room afterward. In those days, they didn't do press conferences. You had to go to their locker to talk to them. And of course, you know, Bobby Welch's locker is just packed. People are talking to him. And so I'm in the back, this young reporter trying to find my way in. I noticed there's Bobby Welch. I mean, not Bobby Welch. There's Jerry Grody at his cubicle all by himself. So I kind of walk up to him, and as I'm approaching him, he kind of raises his hand up, like, you know, don't approach me. So I stop, I kind of look around, you know, is he talking to me? So then he was just about done getting dressed, and I came and says, hey, Jerry, and he just started shaking his head. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, well, I don't know what you mean. So I go, hey, Jerry, I just want to ask you what you told Bobby Welch when he walked in out of the bullpen to pitch to Reggie Jackson. And he just said, he stood up, and he didn't look at me. He just goes, well, you should ask him. And then he walked away. So I'm, you know, young kid, and I'm kind of a little, you know, shocked. You know, that's my first time with a no comment. And so I found out later that he had bad experience with reporters. He just never talked to reporters. So that, okay, I'm going to have to wade my way through all these guys to ask my question to Bobby Welch. And finally I found my way through there, got up to him and asked Bobby Welch, you know, Bobby, I noticed that Jerry Grody stopped you on the way out, told you this important advice to how to pitch to Reggie Jackson. What did he tell you? And Bobby Welch goes, I tell you, I was so nervous. I don't know what in the hell he was saying. That became my column. Because he went out there. There was no pitch he was going to throw a slider that Reggie couldn't hit or a curveball. He was so nervous. He was going to throw his fastball at him like 10, 13 times in a row. And anyway, so that's, you know, I think that's in a long-winded way. Sorry, but that's kind of how you get a column. You know, you kind of look for something in the background or a nuance or, you know, something that maybe tells something beyond the story behind the story.
Yeah, that's a good tip, you know, especially when you're covering something a lot of people are also covering is, you know, find the thing that no one else sees or go in the direction no one else is going. And that's what's going to make your story and your column stand out, because if you're part of the pack and why should people read your story if, someone else is for the LA Times? It's like, well, you've got to make yours unique. And that's a little risky, of course, though, because here you are, you're wandering around, you're getting a no comment, an athlete is, or you're being told, by somebody, who you really take seriously in this authoritative role, no comment. And then, you've got to work harder in that sense, but there's definitely a greater payoff. Hey, have you ever had anyone get mad at you? Obviously, when you're covering high school sports, which is a lot of what you did, you're dealing with, parents, families, obviously that whole world is fierce. It's intense. Parents, I always say kids bring out the best and worst in their parents, especially with youth sports.
Right.
Have you ever had any sort of experiences where you've had a parent didn't like what you maybe wrote about their kid or anything like that, and how did you deal with that?
There's been a couple of times. Obviously, when you're in the business for as long as I've been, you will run into that. I remember one time we were back when Cathy Gregory was the women's volleyball coach at UCSB, and she had a fantastic year. She was named NCAA Coach of the Year, and in those days we had we used to have this little rail on the end of the front of the sports section, and we'd put like news nuggets in there, and we're always trying to find good local news nuggets. Well, I remember being told by somebody, "Hey, do a little news nugget on Cathy Gregory being NCAA Coach of the Year," and we'll put it there. And I even thought to myself, this probably deserves maybe a bigger treatment than that. And he goes, "Oh, you've done features on Cathy Gregory. We'll just put it here that she was NCAA Coach of the Year." So, and I was covering the UCSB. I was covering all UCSB sports in those days. This was before I was sports editor. And so I covered the volleyball team a lot. And so we did this little news nugget, and here I am. I had to go that morning. I had to go to the bank. And I'm in the bank, and there's a long line, and I look over and I see Cathy Gregory is kind of near, she's almost to the teller, and I'm in the back line, and she looks and she sees me, and she comes storming back there. And I don't know if you know Cathy, but she's got a very loud voice. She's very dynamic personality, which is what made her a fantastic athlete and a volleyball coach. And she lit me up. She goes, "Mark," she said, "if this had been Jerry Pym on the basketball team and NCAA Coach of the Year, you guys would have done a big story on it." And I know this is going to sound, self-aggrandizing, but, I'm sticking up for women's sports. If this had been a men's sport, you would have done something more than this. And instead you put this little thing on the thing. And I thought you were better than that. And she was going on and on. And I'm going, but, and the whole time, everybody in line is turning around going, "What's going on here?" She's just yelling at this guy in the middle of the line. And I kept going, "Cathy, it wasn't my call. I'm trying to excuse my way out of it." We put it on the front page, all this stuff. And finally she says, "Okay, that's it, Mark. I still love you, but that's it." And she walked back, and they were waiting for her in the teller. And the teller's like, she wasn't going to ask anybody else what they wanted. She was waiting for Cathy to come back in the front of the line. And I just remember just kind of being like pretty red-faced at that time. There was another time I reported a football player, a high school football player, had been suspended from his team for, as it turned out, I won't say his name, but this was a number of years ago, but he had been suspended for being caught smoking marijuana. And I wrote a story about it. I talked to the coach. He was their star player. They were a very good team. And so of course I'm going to write about it. He didn't play in the game. Why didn't he play? And the coach told me, "We've suspended him for breaking team rules." And I can't tell you any more than that. And so I wrote about that, and the parents were really upset. They said, I got a phone call. I kind of knew the parents peripherally, and they said, people are assuming, I'm getting phone calls from my friends saying, "What did he do? Did he hurt somebody? Was it, blah, blah, blah." And, of course it wasn't anything as nefarious as that. He just got caught with marijuana in his possession at school. And, that was kind of hard because I knew these people. They're good people. And of course they're protecting their son. They don't want to have anything negative written about it. But it was one of those deals where, the guy's the star player. He's not playing. People are wondering, why isn't he playing in the game? He's on street clothes. And the coach was honest about it. He could have told me, no, he's hurt. But, you know, I have a good relationship with the coach, and he told me, and I wrote about it. And that was kind of hard to hear that from the parents. And it's stuff like that, I think. And it hasn't happened to me very often, but it does happen.
Yeah. Yeah. And you've got daughters, right? And so they grew up, you know, in the community. Well, their dad is this prominent local sports writer. Can you talk a little bit about what that was like? You know, what did, you know, you're raising your girls, and, you know, they're probably going to school and talking to some of the people that you're writing about. You know, did they ever give you a hard time because their dad was so well known? And, you know, how did you do that? You know, and did they give you tips, or what was it like? You know, what was that like?
It's funny. I have 4 daughters, and they're all very different. They all played sports. They all, because I was playing a lot of softball, especially when they were growing up, and I used to drag them to all my games. I played on a couple teams that like to travel around a lot, so I traveled around with them and bring them. That'd be our vacation. You get to go watch Dad play softball in, you know, some dusty city or whatever. But so they all actually played sport. They played a couple of them played volleyball too, but they all 4 played softball. And I remember. The oldest one is very self-effacing. She doesn't like having attention brought to herself, and so she would go to these things, but she wasn't the type of person who would get enamored with famous people. And anyway, I remember she was a very good athlete. She played, you know, made varsity at Dos Pueblos as a freshman, and I remember she made the all Channel League team in softball and the all county team, and we did it. I was sports editor at the time, and she gave we in those days we used to get the all county team for baseball and softball, whatever sport. We get them all together up in Santa Ynez, kind of a midway point, and we take this picture. And she had made the all county team, and so I'm telling her, Amy, you've got to go to Santa Ynez for this. She goes, I'm not going. And I go, what do you mean you're not going? And she says, you only picked me because I'm your daughter. And I says, well, I didn't pick the team. The coaches, we do a vote. We send a ballot out to every coach, and she wouldn't hear of it. And so I'm trying to convince her, you got to go to this photo shoot. You know, it's going to look weird. You're not there and everyone else is. And she refused to go. And so what happened was we have this picture. Everybody who made the all county team was this picture. And so what I did to get to my daughter, I took your picture and put it in there too. So anyway, So I've got her on one end of the spectrum, and then I've got this other daughter, Megan. I'm actually at her house right now. Who's also a very good athlete. She actually played softball at UCSB, got a little bit of a scholarship there, and she was the one time they had this women in sports luncheon the round table puts on, the athletic round table, and she would get to go to this. They'd pick a few athletes from each school, and she got to go from Dos Pueblos, and the speaker was, you know, having her picture taken by Rafael Maldonado, still works at the News Press as a photographer, chief photographer. And so I'm covering this event. My daughter's there, and Rafael's taking the pictures. And the speaker goes, I want to have my picture taken with a couple of the athletes, not just of me. So she says, you, and you. And she grabs my daughter and a couple of others, says, okay, you're going to take a picture with me. And Rafael's starting to take the picture, and he goes, and he recognizes Megan and goes, oh, you're Mark's daughter. He says, you can't be in the picture. It's going to look like nepotism or whatever. And I think in the old days, we did have some kind of rules against trying to, you know, that kind of thing. New York Times, when they owned us, was pretty kind of a stickler about it. And so Megan's mad. So my wife is there, and she storms off to my wife, and she goes, they won't let me be in the picture because of Dad. So I apologized to Megan, but I reminded her when she was a little girl, the Lakers, Magic Johnson was doing a fundraiser for UCSB. He was doing they called the Magic Johnson All-Star basketball game. And a couple of NBA guys came up, and they did this game at UCSB. And so a lot of the media came from LA to do it. They did a press conference for it. And so I took my daughter out of school. I think she was in kindergarten or first grade at Kellogg School. And she was a big Laker fan already and loved Magic Johnson. So I said, would you like to come to this, this press conference I'm doing with Magic Johnson? She goes, oh yeah, I'd love to. Mm-hmm. So I brought her to this press conference. It was they did it at, they did it at Rob Gym. And so all these LA Times, I said all these reporters there. Magic's such a good guy with the media. And so he's going along the line. He goes, okay, before we get started, I want to know who you all are. Says, so who are you? And the guy goes, I'm Scott Osler with the LA Times. Who are you? I'm Mark Patton with the Santa Barbara News Press. And Megan's right next to me, this little 6-year-old. And so he bends over and he goes, and what paper do you write for? And Megan looks to him and she goes, I'm Megan Patton and I write for the Santa Barbara News Press. And he just busted out laughing and so forth. And I reminded Megan at this time, he says, no, you've got your time in the sun before, So
that's fun. Yeah.
They've had experiences like that. And they've got a chance to meet some famous people and some people in town who are athletes too. I had a couple of the Gauchos speak to their classes, actually. I remember getting Carrick DeHart and Eric MacArthur to come speak, that great Gaucho team from 1990. And they spoke to one of my daughter's classrooms. And so I've tried to involve my daughters in what I do somewhat. And I think they all turned out okay because of it. They weren't too damaged by it.
Yeah, and I think one of the joys of being a reporter when you have kids is, sometimes you have to take your kids with you. It just works out that way to cover stuff. And I have a 7-year-old, and man, it doesn't matter who I'm interviewing. If she's around, it's like, they're the center of attention. So it's so fun, for them to feel that. Hey, I want to ask you a little bit about go ahead.
It's funny you say that because when the Noozhawk, when they were announcing that I was going to be writing for them, they asked me to provide a picture. And so I looked through pictures of me covering things. I had a picture of me interviewing James Worthy of the Lakers, stuff like that. I don't know. And a couple with the Gauchos. And I had this picture of me at press row at the Thunderdome, and I had 3 of my grandkids with me at Thunderdome. 2 of Amy's kids, Ben and Sam, and then my Megan's daughter Michaela, and they're sitting there with me on press row. And I thought, okay, this is it. This is the one I want them to run, me with my grandkids,
right.
And maybe one of them will keep the legacy alive, the journalist and the Patton family.
Yeah, and make more money than we did, for sure. I want to talk to you about this News Press 2006. There was, a big exodus of editors and reporters after that. Obviously, I don't want to go into rewrite the whole story. People can look it up if they want to. But what I wanted to just sort of, ask you is, you were one of the, 2 or 3 who, stayed up until, very recently, you just retired. And so I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about that decision, because for so many people, they felt an ethical sort of need, like, I need to leave, and whether that's right or wrong, we're not going to get into that. But so many of your friends and your colleagues walked away, no jobs, with kids, not a lot of opportunities, and they had to sort of reinvent the wheel. Can you just talk a little bit about what that moment was like for you and your decision to stay?
Yeah, it's a great question, Josh, and it's one I obviously struggled with mightily. My desk at the News Press at that time was right near the back stairway, and I would be the first person to see the security guard coming up and ready, with human resources, ready to perp walk somebody out of the building. And I probably watched 20 people get walked out of the building, some who were obviously because a lot of people obviously quit, but a lot were walked out of the building too, and that was pretty rough for me. I think God was looking down on me when John Zant was let go, and then Barry was let go later, because those are 2 of my closest friends in the world, and that was rough. I mean, God, I get emotional thinking about it. Those 2 guys are 2 of my best friends in the world, and we had such a great sports section in those days. We had a great staff, and it was pretty hard. I talked to my wife about it. What do we do?
we had two daughters in college at the time, not just one, we had two. And we were paying tuition and trying to pay, make our mortgage. And so part of it was selfish. I needed the job, and it was hard in 2006 when John was let go, and 2008 when Barry was let go, to find a job in the business. And that's when I actually, I tried somewhat. I tried to get a job with the Eugene paper, as I mentioned. I wasn't edgy enough for them. Then I actually tried to get a job a few times at UCSB. Almost got a job. I was a finalist for a job with Coastlines magazine, and didn't get that. It just seemed like it was, I don't know if it was, I was just meant to stay at the news press, because I tried several times to try to leave, and nothing was happening for me. And then I also felt kind of an obligation to the sports community somewhat. It was obviously with my father, having been the sports editor there. I grew up, I knew everybody, all the coaches, a lot of the athletes and so forth. And I just kind of felt compelled to stick it out, and, hopefully things will get better. And so it was kind of the decision had a lot of facets to it for me to stay. And, especially with having children, you have, sometimes your priorities, are around them, what, how this is going to affect them. And so that was a big part of it. It took me a long time, and, these are rough days for all newspapers. Obviously, people don't read newspapers as much as they used to. And, and there's one reason why I've been kind of intrigued to write for Noozhawk. Barry approached me about it. Tom Bolton, who was the editor of the news press when I became sport. He's the one who actually promoted me to sports editor. So I've worked with Tom for many years. And of course, Bill McFadden was a news editor at the news press, and basically started the Beacon, and tried to get me to write for the Beacon way back in the day. I just couldn't afford it. And, I needed those benefits with all those kids. Yeah. And then, of course, Bill started Noozhawk, and it's such a great, especially for a community of our size, to have that good of a internet news source is quite remarkable. And I've always admired Noozhawk, and they're all old news press colleagues of mine, of course. So it seemed like kind of an easy transition for me to write for Noozhawk.
Yeah, no, yeah, everyone has to make the best decision for themselves and their families, and I know that the sports community benefited from you staying quite a bit, because they got 15, 16 more years of your coverage, so I know that decision for them was the right one. Let's we got a few more minutes here. Let's talk about greatest athletes from Santa Barbara, or athletes you really enjoyed covering that were really special to you. You want to drop any names or talk a little bit about those people?
Yeah, because I covered Gaucho basketball for so long, a lot of them were Gaucho athletes. Brian Shaw obviously was the first kind of iconic Gaucho I covered. He had a long career in the NBA. And I'll never forget. And, because I travel with these guys, I got to know them pretty well. And it seemed, I'm kind of fortunate, because UCSB, all three coaches I covered there, Jerry Pym, then Bob Williams, and now Joe Pasternak, they've really made a point of recruiting good kids. I think a lot of it too is you got to get admitted to UCSB. You can't get in if you're a knucklehead. And so they seem to have gotten great people. And, Brian Shaw would be right at the top of the list. I'll never forget when he played for the Lakers and they won that championship. I think it was 2000, the Staples Center. It was his first year with the Lakers, and he had played a big role in that team that year. And I went in the locker room afterward, and he saw me, and he was still really sweaty and so forth. And he comes running up to me and gives me a big hug and says, "We did it! We did it! We did it!" Uh-huh. And I kind of thought, yeah, I did a lot. But, he was including me in this great moment. The Lakers had finally won a
journey. You were there for him when he was starting out, and now here he was, and you were still there. So yeah, you were with him, in that context for sure.
And I'd shared some pretty personal things with him too over the years. His parent, when he got signed by the Celtics, and then he's making all this money now, and he decided to move to Las Vegas for the tax reasons. And his family was driving there to join him. His father, he was very close to his parents. They were amazing people. He was driving there with his father, his mother, and his sister's daughter were driving there and got in a car accident. And his parents were both killed. His sister was killed, and his little niece survived, and he ended up raising her. She was named after him, Brianna. And I've written stories about that. I interviewed Brian about that pain of losing his family, basically because they were following him to his new home. And so I think we had an emotional connection because he shared a lot of those things with me. And so that was probably one of the, athletes that I, where that occurred. There have been others, baseball, I covered Bob Bronsema when he was a player at UCSB. It was the first Gaucho team I ever covered. I took over the Gaucho beat in the spring of 1983. He was their leadoff batter on a team that almost made it to Omaha, and Bob became the coach later. And so I knew him as a player and as a coach, and now he's an assistant athletic director at UCSB. And he's a very good personal friend of mine. And because I've watched him, from those moments when we were both pretty young, and now we're, we're in I'm in my 60s. I think Bob's probably getting close to there now. And so you get those connections with those people. But probably, I was a big fan of Eddie Matthews. He had grown up in Santa Barbara. He went to the same schools I did. The first sports story I ever wrote was on Eddie Matthews. He had gone to La Cumbre Junior High School in Santa Barbara, and I was on I was our sports editor of the Lancer Scroll at La Cumbre Junior High. And Eddie was still playing. This was 1968. I think he was in his last year. And so I did a story out of him in the Lancer Scroll. Years later, he was inducted in the Hall of Fame in 1978. And so Santa Barbara had a big day for him. It was Eddie Matthews Day. They had a parade down State Street for him. And they had a big celebration at the El Paseo. So I went in there and got to interview my idol. And that was my first year at the News Press. Another plum assignment Dave Cole gave to his buddy's kid. And I sat down with Eddie Matthews, and at first, and famous athletes do get a little leery of reporters, because in big cities, especially, they write about, everything, the bad and the good. And so he's a little leery, but then he sees me and I tell him I'm, Mark Patton, and he goes, "Oh, you're Phil Patton's kid." And I go, "Yeah." He goes, "Yeah, come on, sit down and have a beer with me." And so I had this great interview with Eddie Matthews, who was, growing up was my idol. And so, yeah, I'd say those are probably some of the best examples I could give you of some of those people. It's funny, you asked me what some of my favorite stories to write. Because people identify with personal experience, I've written a lot about my family,
Yeah.
Of course, I've written about my dad a lot, being a sports editor. My mother was a tennis coach. In fact, it was funny. She coached tennis, the first women's tennis coach at City College. And then she came back when my sister played at City College, my sister Maureen. Bob Dynenberg talked my mom into coming back to City College and playing on the team, taking 12 units and playing, with her. So I've written about my mom a lot. I've written about my sister. Obviously, they were big influences in my life. And I've written about my children. My brother was a very good tennis coach. He was NCAA Coach of the Year twice, once at UC Irvine and once at Boise State. And so I've written, and he had been blinded in the eye as a kid. It was shot in the eye with a BB gun, the old Christmas story thing, you'll shoot your eye out, kid.
Oh.
Well, somebody shot his eye out. He had to learn how to play tennis with one eye. Gave up baseball because he couldn't see the baseball with half the thing, but he worked really hard to become a really good tennis player, played at UCSB, played professional tennis for a while, and became this great tennis coach. So I wrote about my brother, and that, those personal stories, are the ones that I think really resonate with people. So I've you know, I think I've probably, you know, tapped into that well, maybe once too often, but I think people like reading about the personal side of things.
Yeah, well, that's the great thing about being a journalist and a columnist is you tell people stories, and over time they build a trust in you and a respect for you, and then they want to know your story. And so you almost have to tell your own narrative, because that's part of the storytelling of journalism. And they want to know, well, who is this person who's able to write such great stories? You know, so that's really cool that you're able to, you know, have that opportunity. On a scale of 1 to 10, Mark, with 10 being the best and 0 being the worst, you know, how much did you love your career as a sports writer?
It was a 10 all the way. I mean, I can't believe, you know, God blessed me with the life I really wanted. You know, I really wanted to follow my dad's footsteps. That was part of, obviously I looked up to him tremendously. I was at his elbow through a big part of his career. He was such a good sport, you know, because I'd hound him. Can I go with you? Can I go with you? He took me to the Green Bay Packers played their very first Super Bowl at the Coliseum, Super Bowl I in 1967, I think it was. And Vince Lombardi he wanted to get out of LA. He thought some of the guys, Paul Hornung was really kind of a guy who liked being in the fast life. And he wanted to get those guys out of LA. So they trained at UCSB. Harder Stadium had just been built in 1966. And this is in the January of 67. And so they trained at UCSB, but Vince Lombardi didn't like, it was very secretive. So, but one day he agreed, okay, I'll have a media day. So my dad let me get out of school. It's 1967. I was 13, I think. And actually I was 12. It was in January. And so my dad let me go to this media day, and there weren't very many people there. And there were the Green Bay Packers, you know, Bart Starr, Paul Hornung, Jim Taylor. And, you know, I'm looking at Paul Hornung smoking a cigarette on the sideline and thinking, whoa, this is amazing. And there's you know, Vince Lombardi, he was barefoot. He had frostbite in his feet, Coach knows, years with the Packers. And there he is on the sideline in a tub of water, warm water, barefoot, you know, coaching his team at practice. And these are just things that, you know, that I'm thinking, gosh, I was privy to so much amazing behind the scenes stuff in sports. You know, I loved sports growing up, and I loved writing. You know, I was one of these kids who was writing. I never let my friends know this, and I can't believe I'm admitting it now. I used to write poetry as a kid. I loved writing poetry, and because my buddies, I'd never let them know that. but I like to write, and I like sports, and this was kind of like the perfect marriage for me, you know. And it doesn't matter, I didn't get rich doing it. I've lived a life I really wanted to live, and here I am talking to Josh Molina and still doing it for Noozhawk.
What a great conversation, Mark. I really appreciate your time. Could talk to you, you know, forever, all day about journalism and writing and reporting. But I know that everyone's real delighted that you're going to continue to be published in Noozhawk, so people will still be able to experience, you know, all your skill and great work. So that's really something to look forward to. And thanks a lot, Mark. Thanks for all your contributions over the years. You know, I know it's hard as a journalist. People tend to focus on the people we write about, but, you know, as one journalist to another, I appreciate all your work you've done. You're, you know, the key to measuring someone's success, in my opinion, you know, one of those is longevity. And longevity, you've shown that you've been able to establish a long-term relationship with your readers, and they have appreciated and love the work that you've done. And, you know, whether we make a lot of money or we don't, there's that value of knowing that you've had that impact on the community is priceless. So I want to just thank you for everything you've done. So I look forward to reading your column, you know, and all your columns coming ahead. So thanks a lot, Mark. Appreciate your time.
Well, I really appreciate your kind words, Josh. You know, it's been a labor of love, and I appreciate you thinking of me that way, and glad to be a partner with you now in this new quest of mine.
All right, great. Have a good one. Take care.
All right, thank you too. Take care.